Hey Jeepers, Jason from Iron Rock Off-Road here. Today we're doing an installation on a WJ belly skid plate. WJ being a 99 to 04 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and a belly skid plate is going to be there to protect your transfer case and your catalytic converter. So what we've got here is the skid plate, some hardware. We've got some nut plates to bolt it into the uniframe, some bolts and some washers, some instructions. The skid plate itself is all 1/4 inch steel, and it's got both sides on the front and the back for sliding over obstacles, both sides on the sides, black powder coat. It's just a really heavy duty piece. It's as high ground clearance as it can be. So for tools, we've got a 29/64 drill bit on a drill. Got a little impact wrench just to make things a little easier. Tape measure, 5/8 socket on a ratchet, round file, some paint for the uniframe, and about 3 feet of baling wire. Alright, your first step is going to be to raise the skid plate up into place, support it with a floor jack or a jack stand, and get it all the way up against the uniframe, and then you center it front to rear, making sure it's covering your transfer case and your catalytic converter. And you can just throw a tape measure on it for a quick measurement, front to rear, to make sure it's in here nice and straight. Next step is going to be to drill your holes. So with the skid plate held firmly up against the uniframe, we're going to drill our 7 mounting holes using a 29/64 drill bit. Use some oil on the drill bit so it stays sharp through the whole process, and drill your 7 holes. Now we've removed our transfer case skid plate, so we're going to clean up our freshly drilled holes. So when you drill the hole, it leaves some burrs and sharp edges on the inside of the hole. And when you're trying to position your nut plates over those freshly drilled holes, you don't want your nut plate to get hung up on a little burr and making it more difficult to position the nut plate. So I'm going to use a round file. Just clean up the inside edge and the outside edge of that hole. Once you've cleaned up all your holes, removed all the burrs, throw a little paint on there just to paint the exposed metal to prevent rust. Next up, we're installing our nut plates. So when the nut plate goes up inside the uniframe, you have to fish it from this hole back here all the way up to the 3 holes up here. The flat plate goes down, the nuts go up. It's a good idea to run a bolt through each hole just to make sure the holes are nice and clean so you don't have any debris inside the hole. Alright, we've got our nut plate ready to go. So we're going to use just a little bit of baling wire, and I'm going to fish it from this very frontmost hole of the skid plate all the way back to here. So I'm going to measure out my length, put a little kink in it just so I know my length, put just a nice little curve to it, slide it in, find it with my finger, pull it through, put just a little hook on it, like this, strong enough to hold the nut plate, but not so strong that I can't pull it out. Keep a little tension on it as you're pulling it in. A little wiggle through there. And boom, our nut plate is in position. I'm going to put 1 bolt in here. Get it started now. If these holes were not in position, now I could lift up the whole nut plate and swing it around until those holes are in position. Use some baling wire to hold that while I take my bolt back out. And we're ready to go. Next up is our 4-hole nut plate. I've run a bolt through each hole just to make sure everything's clear. And you'll notice this nut plate's got a little section where it's thinned out in the middle. That's just so it can flex a little bit to fit through the floor. So we're going to go in through this hole, and we're just going to have to put just a little bend to it to get it through the hole. I'm going to use the same trick, the baling wire from the frontmost hole back to here. So I'm going to get my length right, just a little curve to it. On the end, put a little hook on it, and we're ready to go. And this is the part where you need to flex it just a little bit. And pulls it right into position. And it's in position over my holes. Now again, you can put a bolt in here. If you need to lift the nut plate up and reposition it at all. This one happens to be right where we need it to be. All right, our holes are drilled, our nut plates are in place. We're ready to put our skid plate in place. It is nice to have a helper for this job, as the skid plate is pretty heavy. Be careful putting your bolts in so you don't lift your nut plates up too high. You just want to lift it up a little bit, get your bolt started. Little baling wire just to get the nut plate back into position. And we're ready to tighten our bolts. I'm just tightening them a little bit with the impact wrench, and I'll come back in and torque them by hand. The bolts are all tight, and that completes our installation. The best thing about an upgrade like this is the peace of mind. You can now attack the obstacles and know your Jeep's got the protection it deserves. Here's a little shot of Jeep's version of the same belly skid. You can see it's really light. It's got a nice bend to it through here, and it's made out of 1/8 inch steel, whereas the Iron Rock unit's made out of 1/4 inch steel. So we're getting a nice upgrade in protection today.